You're listening to the Accelerating Growth's Reg A to M&A podcast, where we speak with the leaders in capital raise to the leaders in M&A and everyone in between. Your host is Roy Gatling. Let's get to the show.
All right, today our guest is Tony Paquin. He is the co-founder, chair, and CEO of iRemedy. iRemedy is on a mission to transform the medical supply chain industry. Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Roy. It's great to be here. Happy to join you.
You and your team have a really impressive history. So if you would, tell us a little bit about how you and your team got to this point and how you're transforming the medical supply chain.
Sure, love to do that. So we are guys that have been, around the software industry for a long time. So I sort of grew up as a software programmer. My brother Gary, who's one of my co-founders, was an executive at IBM and later at Computer Associates, where he was a VP of sales. And the joke in the family was at one point he needed to make quotas, so he sold me a computer. And in those days, you got a computer, they didn't do anything. You had to learn how to program to make them work. So I became a programmer. So we've worked together, Gary and I, for 30, 40 years, done a couple of pretty large software companies, started one in the insurance industry that we built it up to about 1,000 people, a couple $100 million in revenue, ran it, ended up selling it and running it for a group of insurance companies. It was insurance software business. And, we ended up selling that. That went on to become a $1 billion company in the end. So that's still very much up and running. Then we later set up another company, which was an electronic medical record software business. And we sold that in an IPO. We took that public on the NASDAQ. So, we've kind of lived both those experiences of, on the one hand, selling a company through acquisition, and on the other hand, doing an IPO. The other deal is my interesting partner, Chief Technology Officer Jim Harding. He actually was one of the original inventors of MS-DOS. And sold it to Bill Gates for the creation of Microsoft. So that's a pretty cool story. It was a very exciting time for him. And, in those days, Microsoft was a real, there were a couple of young guys who, were in their 20s in Seattle. So he did that. And then he did, filed some patents with Paul Allen and created a database at Microsoft and some pretty exciting work. Ultimately, Jim went on to sell two companies to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos, joined Amazon, became the vice president of technology there, and really is the guy that built what we all think of as Amazon. So the Amazon marketplace. That was really Jim's special, what he did. When he joined Amazon, they were a bookstore. And then they became the everything store under his direction. You can imagine he's just a fascinating individual. He's brilliant. And he and I were really close friends. And, at one point about 5 years ago, I set off to do this, which was to reinvent the medical supply industry, wanted to build some kind of AI-driven marketplace technology. So naturally, I went to the guy. It's like Jim said to me, he says, well, if you want to build the Amazon of healthcare, you should work with the guy who built the Amazon of Amazon. Yeah. So that's what we did. So a little bit of the history, a lot of fun guys.
Well, that's fantastic. I think we could have, over a cold beverage, a lot of interesting stories. I think we've been through essentially the history of, compute as, from the advent of the personal computer on to today. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
Very
it's
amazing,
fantastic.
really, when you think about that history. And, I hate to kind of age myself too much, but we lived through some times that were
That's
really
right.
fascinating, and it was just a really interesting time. Kind of moved through, it was like a computer world, IBM, and all that. And then it became a software world, which is when I started doing my first software deal. Then it became an internet world, right? And now we would probably argue that it's artificial intelligence generation.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And we're definitely going to get into that because I know that applies to what you're doing there at iRemedy.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I think you recently went through a capital A, fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to just briefly hear from you a little bit about the process you had to go through in order to do that, how it went for you, and any suggestions or maybe caveats you have for anyone else that might be pursuing that?
So, we've done very well. We've done really, you could think of it as two approaches to capital for iRemedy. One was we did a Reg D. Now, in a Reg D, you sell stock to accredited investors, and it's a little bit more regulated, a little bit more documentation required. For us, it was a good way to go because the potential investors for us were doctors. And doctors are typically accredited investors. An accredited investor has a certain net worth or a certain level of income, which implies that they have a certain level of sophistication. So we did that. That worked out really, really well. But we were also convinced, that we had other people, just customers and end users and consumers and people who weren't accredited that wanted to invest in the company. And we thought it'd be a good initiative and another place for us to go. So we did, as you would know, a Reg A investment. And actually, I think it's considered to be a Reg A plus, which has to do with how much money can you raise and so forth. So that has worked really well because while we raised money, we raised less money on the Reg A than we did on the Reg D. The Reg A is ongoing, so it's not over yet. We'll let that continue to go. But the branding value is fantastic because you're now able to advertise, you're able to speak to a bigger market, and that has this other value of just like promoting your brand, building the business, enables you to get out and tell your story a little bit more publicly. I think that's a huge advantage. In our case, the other thing I would note is that we spent a lot of time on corporate governance. So, we're a Delaware corporation. We have a good board of directors. We're a fully audited company. We have a good CFO. Like we invested a lot in that because frankly, someday we're probably going to do an IPO. So this, kind of exercises the team, gets them ready for that, later transaction. But my advice to people would be if you're going to go down the road of a Reg D or a Reg A, to invest that time and effort into sort of increasing your knowledge and sophistication in that corporate governance side of the house. It's just worth it. You'll sleep better at night knowing that you're surrounded by the right kind of lawyers, auditors, advisors.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, you having been through an IPO and, any sort of acquisition, going through due diligence, what that's like. And so
right.
The requirement for audited records and things of that nature, big deal. All right. Well, that's fantastic. I think that'd be helpful to anyone that's pursuing that. Now, one thing I've picked up on, your company is growing pretty rapidly. And so, there's probably a lot of areas or options, but where is the continued growth going to be coming from in your mind?
So there is a lot of different opportunities for us. First off, we're growing rapidly, but we're still very, very small in the context of our market, which is basically the medical supply industry. It depends on what all you want to count in our world, but it's a few $100 billion market, depending if you're thinking of pharmacy or medical devices or medical supplies or surgery or whatever the case might be. But it's obviously a massive market, and it's terribly inefficient. It's old. A couple of the big medical supply distributors have been around for 100 years or more, so it's due to be reinvented or modernized. So we have a lot of growth opportunities. I think probably where we're seeing the most action right now is the manufacturers of medical supplies are wanting to get a little bit more directly connected to the end users and sort of this direct distribution model. I think you're going to see a lot of growth in that area. And then the other interesting thing about medical supplies, I actually have a book, by the way, coming out on this, plug my book a little bit. But we have a book coming out in about 2 weeks we've been working on for a year on the globalization of the medical supply chain. So probably 90% of all pharmaceutical, medical devices, medical supplies are made overseas. And by the way, mostly in China. And this is a problem. And that was really the problem during the pandemic. You couldn't get anything. Well, because it was a global supply chain that, of course, fell apart. The world is now waking up to this. You see this even politically, a lot of talk about, supplier relationships, countries that we're doing business with, and so forth. So we see a lot of action in that area where either in the U.S., where they're building new manufacturing here in the States, or, what they refer to sometimes as friendshoring. So in other words, offshoring, but with friendly countries. Like, you're going to see Mexico become a much bigger player in this market, for example. And so for us, that represents opportunity because we help these new companies and new countries and manufacturers kind of get access to the U.S. market. That's like our vision. We want to be able to do that. So that's just going to create massive opportunity for us.
Yeah, I was
surprised. I mean, one big client and we double our revenue.
I was curious about repatriation of some of that, especially coming out of the whole COVID, time frame. And hearing that about Mexico, I think that's encouraging. I was wondering about that. I mean, clearly in automotive and compute and things like that, that was a big deal years ago. And I grew up in South Texas, so I kind of got to see it firsthand.
No, you get it. Yeah,
so I saw it firsthand.
I grew up in Michigan, and my dad was a GM executive. And so we lived through that era where, it used to be everything was made in America. And then it moved to Japan, and it moved a little bit to Mexico and other places, but ultimately all went to China. And that's definitely going to change. Mexico, by the way, is, I think, a fascinating country. We have all these southern border controversies, but the Mexico economy is probably going to continue to grow and do really good. I think you're going to see massive manufacturing south of the U.S. border. The re-domestication, if you will, of the medical supply chain it's absolutely going to happen. Now, it's not the kind of thing you can do overnight. Like, it'll take decades and decades to turn that big ship around, but it's inevitable. You can't have, you can't live through pandemics. And even today, like, if you go out and you just go to Google and you Google drug shortage, you're going to see articles right now of critical cancer drugs that are in massive shortages. I mean, people can't get the treatments they need because there's shortages, because these products come from around the world. And, there's things going on in the world that make it unreliable as a supply chain. So definitely going to happen.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of things here, so I'm curious, maybe some of the challenges you faced in bringing technology into this sector. Have there been many at all?
Yeah, it's a lot. There always are, right? When you think about it, right? If you're saying, I'm going to disrupt a market, I'm a market disruptor. Well, the very word tells you that it's a problem. Like, you're disrupting somebody. And whoever you're disrupting is probably not happy with the disruption. Right. So you've got, that sort of legacy world out there that's going to resist you. And the other thing that we found in the medical world or the healthcare industry is Silicon Valley, the tech world, is very logical. They're very common sense driven. As I say, in the Silicon Valley, 2 + 2 always equals 4.
It's logic based.
Yeah. But when it's logic based, it's a lot for Elon Musk and all those guys, they look at it and they go, well, it's obvious. You do it like this. They're smart people and they execute. Healthcare in the United States particularly just doesn't operate that way. It's very political. The largest healthcare provider in the United States is the government. The largest payer in the United States is the government. It's highly regulated, very bureaucratic. And 2 + 2 frequently doesn't equal 4. It's just, it has its own math. And so that's why over the years you would see, Google or Microsoft or others would kind of get in and then they get out. Even Amazon Got in healthcare, got out of healthcare. Like it on the outside looking in, it seems so obvious. But once you get inside, you realize, no, it really isn't. And so we're unique because you kind of saw my background earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a software guy, but I've been in the insurance and healthcare world really my entire adult career. And I mentioned Jim, he was VP of technology at Amazon, but Jim and I met many, many years ago when he was doing kind of a venture funded project with a very large hospital on the West Coast called Providence Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's very unique in that regard, in that he's a globally leading technologist, but he happened to have been exposed to the real world of healthcare. And so that was a rare combination. So, he's able to sort of help me kind of connect these two disparate worlds. But yeah, there's a lot of resistance. It's not easy. And developing new tech solutions is expensive. And you're doing something that's never been done before. It's going to be challenging.
Sure. I've noticed, a number of patents or patent, submissions and things. Yeah.
Yeah, the total patent portfolio now, directly attributed to iRemedy, we've got about a dozen patents and patents pending. I think we've got about 5 issued and another 10 or 11 pending still, which we feel pretty good about. And, it's a phenomenal, resource to protect our intellectual property. So we were ahead of the game. We started really thinking about artificial intelligence and how it could help us solve this problem in healthcare. So what you have in healthcare is probably true in a lot of industries, but in the case of healthcare, very bureaucratic, very legacy driven, super complicated, highly regulated, and just tons and tons of problems of how you manage availability and allocations and pricing and contracts and all these things. And, if you had an unlimited number of people, you could solve the problems. If you could go, I'll put 1,000 people on that problem, you could solve it. But of course, you can't put 1,000 people on the problem. And so what we ended up realizing is, well, AI is getting powerful enough. This was back about 4 years ago or so. We said, we could develop AI agents who we could teach to help our staff, and they could then overwhelm the problem, almost like a brute force kind of solution. So it's like, rather than changing the business process, because that's always very difficult to do, we instead develop technology to overwhelm that outdated business process to make the business process work more efficiently. Because you always want to go back to, an industry and go, hey, let's scrap everything you're doing and do it a new way. It'll work so much better. But, people, they're not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned AI, and I just want to dig into that a little bit more because I did a little reading on ways that you're using, but I'd like for you to describe maybe how you use that for your catalog or, whether it's logistics or what have you, but how that really comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea even our tagline, we talk about smarter supply saves lives. And what we're really saying is to put like intelligence into the supply chain. Because today, there's millions of products, but we know very little actually about where those products come from and how they're manufactured and when they're available and who can buy them at what price. Like, it's just very complicated, and we're not able to do that. So we said, let's build a smart catalog. Let's get as much intelligence into that catalog as we can. That's obviously like an ongoing process. And then let's create some digital agents to help us do that. So what we did was we started looking at everything that we're doing in the company. Is there an AI agent that we could develop to automatically take that over? So Deloitte created a term called digital doppelgangers. It's the idea of like a digital agent that replicates a human. Right. And then the human and the agent work next to each other to get a task done. Well, that's essentially what our technology does. And so we call them personas. So we we teach a digital agent to do something, and then instead of having one person, so like for example, we'll have a person that manages our catalog. Anybody in e-commerce, any kind of supply chain, will tell you that catalog management is like major hassle, never works properly. Data is always it's always a problem. You'd think it wouldn't be, but it really is. And if I had 1,000 employees, well, I could just sit there and manually fix the catalog all the time, right? But again, you can't. So what we did is we trained an agent to manage the catalog. So it can go out on the internet and it can learn databases from other websites and it can pull data down, and then it can talk to our various distributors and dealers, and it can check availability of a product in real time. And it can do the things that a human would do. It's just a whole lot of them. Again, you overwhelm it with brute force. So we've developed about 5 of these personas, and we're always looking to do more, that kind of run our business for us. So it's interesting. We're still very small. We did 50 million plus last year, but we have, I don't know, right now I have to go check, but we have like 20 employees. I mean, we're relatively very small.
That's a great financial ratio there.
Yeah, because our operating is done by the agents, not by humans. I mean, that's the goal. We still have a lot of work to do. We're still, obviously, I always tell people, software's never done and it never works perfectly, so you're constantly enhancing and improving. But those are the concepts that we're after. Try and manage a very complex world and a very complex industry by overwhelming it with automated agents who work on our behalf.
You're kind of setting a standard there for this whole sector, right? You're running efficiently and trying to bring that efficiency to the market.
That's what we think. And then the market on its own is seeking out efficiency. That's why you'll have a manufacturer who'll say, "Hey, we're some $1 billion company," and they're like, "We want a more efficient way to get to our customers." Well, then we're here to help enable that, right? So we want to be kind of like a toolbox to have tools available to those companies who are looking to modernize or bring efficiency or really to revolutionize the distribution methods that they use. Because substantially, most of the medical supply distribution is the same systems, methods, and companies for the last 50 years. There really hasn't been an overhaul of the way that they're doing that work.
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on something. I was going to ask if there were adjacent markets, maybe that could take advantage of this, or might make sense to kind of bring in.
So what we did is we took our patent portfolio and we spun it off into a subsidiary company. We took the patents, we licensed them up to iRemedy, so we own them exclusively for the medical supply industry. That subsidiary is called Grocket, and our CTO, Jim, is now the CEO of that, and he's going to begin to look at what you're describing. Are there we know there are other industries that have the same problems. Arguably, every industry does. The way Jim will describe it is he'll walk you through the ratio of sort of people versus computers, and how 20, 30 years ago there was maybe one computer for every 5 people, then one for every 3 people, then one computer for every person, and that continues to go. The projection now, they're saying in 20 years there'll be more CPUs than trees.
Wow.
In the world. Because as you know, like everything's got a CPU, right? I'm sitting there looking at my desk right now. There's like 9 computers on my desk because you got a microphone, no doubt, has a chip in it. The computer, obviously, my cell phone's over here. My headset's, got chips in it. I mean, on and on and on, right?
Yep.
So what we end up with is like information overload. We thought we lived through the information age. I would argue we lived through the information overload age. And so the machines have outpaced the people in terms of the people's ability to manage the machines. And that's what this technology is really designed to do. The technology is designed to equip people with, with agents that work next to them to allow them to manage, this massive overload of tasks and activities. Again, it's, you and I think about it all the time, but I'm like, I get up in the morning, I'm on my phone and, I got this thing and social media and this function, that function, off you go, right? But 20 years ago, you didn't do any of that, right?
No, I mean, you can look on your phone and see how many devices are essentially assigned to you. And I spent time at a company that produced, silicon, and, they had one division that was assigned to automotive, cars are rolling computers, so.
Yeah. Well, that's funny as, of course, like I said, I was a kid of a GM executive growing up in the 60s and the 70s. And in those days, cars were kind of analog. They were internal combustion engines with distributors. And I know it sounds ridiculous. It's funny. I feel like I'm like my dad.
Well, I understand exactly
the way it used to be. Yeah. But today you can't work on a car. Like, it's a highly technical, you're driving somewhere, they plug in the computers and they diagnose it with computer technology. I mean, it's totally different. I can't even imagine the number of microchips in our cars today.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch, no doubt about it. All right, well, let's see here. I'm going to get to our last question here because I don't want to keep you too long, but I got to tell you before we go, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I could spend hours with you, but let me ask you this. So, as best you can, tell us what's on the horizon for iRemedy. What's coming?
Sure. And Roy, let me say also, I enjoy the conversation. Would love to do it more anytime because these are subjects I love. But iRemedy's got some pretty exciting things happening. I think you'll see the really big activity for us goes back to this idea of working globally with friendly nations or here in the United States to advance this re-domestication of the medical supply chain. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're industry leaders in that, and that's going to be a really exciting time in the next 5 to 10 years. Look, it's great on every level. You're bringing jobs back to the United States. We're going to rebuild our manufacturing base here in the country. You're going to get better products, higher quality, more reliable. So that's super exciting. We love it. And it's a massive business opportunity. On the other side of the coin, sort of the equity side, we're going to continue to do capital raises. And at some point, there's going to be something. Probably current thinking is an IPO, but, there's always that acquisition potential as well. So, the job one, though, is to build a, fast growth, highly automated, profitable company. That's the challenge. And do that first, the other things take care of themselves. And that's where all our emphasis is. But again, going back to your question, I think you're going to see the excitement in this industry is going to be in this shift of this I hate to say deglobalization, but globalization as we lived through the last, it's really been started probably 30 or 40 years ago now, probably about 40 years ago, I'd say in the 80s is when it started. That's going to substantially change. It's not going to go away, but it's not going to be like it was. That's going to be clear in the next 10 years that it's not going to be that 90% of everything in this office right here is made in China. That's going to be different. And while it could be change can be difficult in some ways for a lot of people, but there's opportunity there. And we're excited by the opportunity side of that discussion.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I think you should be. I loved hearing all about what you and your team have done there. And I'm going to be sure and put links to iRemedy and to your bio in the show notes here. And I think I may come back to you at some point here in the future again, because I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today. I can't thank you enough.
Likewise, Roy, I did too. Look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Accelerating Growth Reg A to M&A podcast. Please share with your colleagues and subscribe. And feel free to contact us with suggestions for interviews or topics that you'd like to hear. We'll catch you on the next one.